William John. But I'm known around here as William John. Some people call me Willie, but I like FW. I was born in Prussia on March 3rd, 1827. I was drafted into the Prussian army at the age of 20 in 1847-48. I was a member of the heavy cavalry at that point and helped in putting down the revolution of 47-48, which drove Karl Schurz and General Siegel out of Germany. I married Henrietta Vaux when I was in Germany in 1850. My wife and I left Prussia and arrived in the United States in 1852. Henrietta died of cholera that year while we were in Milwaukee. I was 25 years old. But 2 months later, I married Johanna Dietrich, known as Josie. In the fall of 1854, I came to Oconto in one of the Ludington lumber vessels. I worked for Mr. Hubble in the Ludington mill and stayed until May of 1856 when my wife, Josie, who had remained in Milwaukee, along with our first child, Clara, joined me and we moved to Gillett, where out of the virgin forest, we crafted a home where the weary, hungry traveler or woodsman was always welcome. Sorry, this is in different order here. When we first sought our home in this area, the only way to reach it was by water or over the ice by an Indian trail without bridges from Green Bay. I heard some complaints earlier from people about these orange cones. No bridges. The only white woman we saw on our way was a Mrs. Timothy Casey in a small shanty up the river in the town of Gillett, on what became the site for a number of years of my home. I built a small shanty where my wife and I, with our 4 small children, were cheered at night by the howling of wolves, which at that time were many. Little aside, I live 10 miles west of here. I heard wolves last night. Same families, I believe, you know. When flour was needed, I would carry it home on my back. When my oldest son and daughter first attended school, they would travel 5 miles each way through the woods without a house in sight on the way. Fish and game were abundant, but that became very monotonous, and my children grew tired of a venison diet. By now, Johanna and I, Josie and I, had 6 children, 4 sons. Alfred, born in 1857, Henry, born in 1858, was right behind me. William W., born in 1860, and Victor, who we called Vic, born in 1872. And 2 daughters, Clara Ellen, who I mentioned, born in 1854, and Laura, born in 1866. After arriving in the United States, I served in the 38th Wisconsin Infantry during the Civil War. I enlisted right here in Gillett in 1864 and served until the end of the war. I participated in the Battle of Hatcher's Run, the Siege of Petersburg, and the capture of Petersburg. I was in the Big Review of Washington and returned with the rank of sergeant. After a hard-fought battle, I once told my comrades I just received a letter from my wife in which she said she wished she should have a cow, as the milk would be nice for the family. So the first money I received as a soldier, I sent home, and later I received another letter saying that she had purchased the cow, and some of the neighbors had come over to help build a warm, comfortable stable for the animal. She didn't say it, but I think it may have been nicer than the shanty. She mentioned the name of the neighbors. They all lived 9 miles away in Hickory. Among them were a Mr. Lord and Mr. Trecarton. Apologize if I get that wrong. After the war, we moved to the land that is now Wanderer's Rest Ceremony. Any of y'all heard of it? Well, I hope so, because we're right here. I received a sum of $10 on August 30th, 1871, from the village of Gillett, from the land that I had donated for a cemetery. I did lumbering and farming and held civic offices. My grandson Kelvin and I, we were timber cruisers. going into the forest to find out how many board feet of lumber could be harvested. One of the hardest experiences of our lives was in 1871, when the sun was obscured by smoke for 2 weeks, during which time the woods surrounding us was all on fire. We carried water and fought the fire night and day without rest. On the night of October 8th, 1871, the children spent the night on a blanket in the road while my wife and I fought off the fire. We could not leave the children in the shanty for fear it would be consumed by the fire. This was the night of the Peshtigo fight. I have been a member of the Odd Fellows Lodge a number of years, having joined the Oconto Lodge number 190 on September 12th, 1878. It was a great honor to be presented by the Lodge with a veteran's jewel. I cherished it very much, and I hoped it would be buried with me. It was some sad news that we learned in 1885 that our daughter Clara had died at the young age of 31 while being operated on for an ovarian tumor in Oconto. Clara and Jacob Wilhelm's son, Alfred, 1 year old, went to live with his uncle, my son Alfred, and his wife, until he was adopted by the Lorig family. I signed the adoption papers a short time later. Little Alfred's father, Jacob, had disappeared shortly after Clara's death, and was later found to have died in the Dakotas during the Great Blizzard. One of the John family was here earlier and told me that she believes that that was the blizzard of 1888, in which over 3,000 children were, it's balmy day, and they woke up and went to school without shoes on, and by the middle of the day it was below zero, and the weather was so hot, so harsh that the water was as it was coming toward them, it was freezing, and in many cases, she tells it much better than I do, but it's just terribly frightening. Terribly, terribly frightening. Poor Clara had many deaths. 2 children, her first husband, and ourselves. She was buried near us, right over here, with her first husband, William Howell. The Oconto reporter county reporter had a wit about them, and they reported in 1883 that Charles Mackenzie was the leanest man in town and myself was the fattest man in town, and we were a jolly pair, as it takes 3s, this is out of the newspaper, so it's got to be right, to beat us for fun, good nature, good sense, and worthy citizens. I often wonder what they meant by that. I take it all as a compliment, except maybe the fattest man part. In my younger days, I grew to be 5'10". I had sandy hair and blue eyes. I've shrunk some since then, and sandy hair, well, still have blue eyes, but in later life, I become more robust. I must tell you that a young lady here who wrote my piece seems to be very caught up on the fact that I had gained a few extra pounds. I have cut out at least 3 references to it at this point, but there are a couple more to come, so we'll see, Miss Smith, if it still happens. Early in 1883, I was told that Mr. Mackenzie was envious of the wooden shoes I had taken to wear. He claimed they were the size of Chinese junks. Now, is this another relative of mine here? Because it seems like you have big feet as well.
15.
Yeah, I don't think mine were quite that big, but my Chinese junks were pretty big. He threatened to split them open with an axe at the first opportunity. Never happened. In 1902, I served as postmaster of the village of Gillett, and I also served as treasurer when the village of Gillett was large enough to have one. The treasurer was required in 1902 to give a bond of $25,000. I don't know if that was because of me or because of the state, or what, but that's a lot of money for 1902. I remember some other interesting incidents of my early days. One is when United States Senator Philetus Sawyer went out on one of his campaigning trips through our lumbering country. It seems while attempting to drive from Shawano into this county, he was overtaken by night, became lost, and went off the road. He stopped his team and alighted from his vehicle to search for the road. He finally found it, but then he couldn't find his team. He succeeded in reaching my home and secured our assistance and a lantern and was able to recover the team. We made him comfortable for the night, and Senator Sawyer died at the age of 84 in 1900. Our home was a stopping off place for many weary travelers, and Johanna served some very tasty meals, another reference to my size which I will leave out. My wife was stricken with cancer and continued to deal with that in old age for 12 years, until she was taken by death at the age of 78 on April 30th, 1908. In 1910, I suffered for 3 months with uric poisoning, until death finally claimed me in July of 1910. Now, I understand my funeral was most impressive. According to the reporter, in 1910, the Chicago and Northwestern Railroads ran a special train of 4 coaches from Oconto so that all my friends could come to Gillett to pay their respect to me. There were 100 Oddfellows and several members of the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic, a firing squad from Company M, and many others, including a number of ladies. At Stiles Junction in O'Connell Falls, a number of Oddfellows and others boarded the train. The Pulsar Lodge of Oddfellows joined the O'Connell Lodge here in Gillett. My service was held at the Methodist Church here, with services conducted by Reverend Wendell Umline of Appleton, who was supplying the pulpit of that church. Reverend Umline delivered an eloquent sermon, I am told, and Reverend C.G. Gerlach, who was the Lutheran pastor, who had known me for many years, was kind enough to give a complete biography of my life in German. At my gravesite, the firing squad fired 3 volleys over my grave, and a bugler sounded taps. My grandson Kelvin, I believe, is over there talking about himself. I wonder if he's mentioned my name. As I mentioned earlier on, Josie and I have always welcomed the weary and hungry woodsman and the traveler. It is appropriate that we lay resting, my wife Josie and I, on part of our land